Hi guys, it's Nat from Rest in Pieces here. Today we're going to be teaching you how to perform taxidermy on a rat. Now, there's something important that you need to know, and that is that when it comes to the word taxidermy, that specifically means removing and arranging a skin on a specimen. So this is different to things like skeletal articulation, insect preservation, plastination. Taxidermy is a specific term for a specific task. The origins of the word taxidermy are taxi means arrange and dermy means skin. So if you think about words like dermatitis or something like that, you can think about the reference towards the phrase skin. So we're going to be going through a process with our rat today of removing the skin, preserving it, and then in our series tomorrow night, we will be mounting our specimen. Now, when you think about taxidermy, you might think that you could possibly get squeamish with the skinning process, and you might think that it would be quite messy and that there will be lots of blood and viscera. But skinning is actually quite a clean process if you're good at it. And it's also a transferable skill. And what I mean by that is once you get good at skinning one specimen, you'll pretty much be able to skin most specimens well. You will have to learn a few different types of animals, like a bird versus a mammal versus a marsupial, or even a reptile. But pretty much once you've learned how to skin, you'll be able to transfer that skill to many things. The difficult thing about taxidermy is not the skinning part, it's the putting it back together and making it look lifelike and making the anatomy look real. And so in this beginner class, we're going to do an anthropomorphic pose of a rat. Anthropomorphic pose means human-like pose. So we're going to have the rat standing up and we'll be mounting it in a dome, which is not necessarily true to life, but it's going to give you a fairly good scope of how to do the basics of taxidermy. And then as you move on in your journey and as you learn more, you'll be trying to move away from anthropomorphic, well, unless that's what you're into, because there are some people who do beautiful stuff like that. But most people will move away from something anthropomorphic and really try and capture a lifelike resemblance to the specimen or to the animal. So we'll jump into today. And we'll first talk about the specimen itself. So we're based in Australia, and in Australia it's illegal for you to own pythons. So snakes as pets. And all of those snakes are native to Australia, which means that you have to have a permit in order to own them. And of course, those snakes need to be fed. So we sell frozen in pet stores, things like rats, baby chicks, rabbits, quails, small mammals and birds that the pythons then feed on. So we haven't killed any specimens to produce this tutorial. In other countries, sometimes you can buy them frozen. Other times you might need to source the specimen yourself. We like to use the python feeding specimens because they're euthanized, so usually gassed if it's a good supplier so that it's humane for the rat. But we like to use them because we know that they're bred to feed a native Australian snake, and therefore they're not going to carry or hold diseases. If we were to source our rats through an exterminator, then it would be likely that they might, contain different diseases or germs that wouldn't be kosher for a human to be around or touch, or potentially absorb into their body through minor cuts or nicks, things like that. So we choose to use the python feeding rats, and as I said, we buy them frozen. But what we like to do is we like to thaw them out in the fridge. So we'll take our specimen out, we'll put it into a Ziploc bag, and we'll generally thaw the specimen out overnight. And that will just allow a slow thawing out process so that the specimen doesn't get too warm, the temperature doesn't come down too quick, the bacteria doesn't transfer into the skin. So that's why we like to do a slow thawing out process via the fridge. So if you don't want to put it in a fridge overnight, I'd recommend at least a few hours out. You don't want to work on a specimen when they're too frozen because you won't be able to identify the anatomy correctly, and it makes it very difficult to skin. So you do want your specimen to have some movement and flexibility in the skin and in the tissue. So I'm just going to take my rat out of this kidney tray now. I just have a kidney tray because I like to put any protein. So protein is tissue, blood, things like that. I like to move it away off of my tray and into the kidney tray so that I'm not getting any protein on my fur. You don't want to transfer any bacteria onto your skin. The skin is the important bit that we want to keep in taxidermy because bacteria can start to cause something called slipping, which is where big patches of fur or feathers might fall out of your specimen. So we always want to be trying to keep our workspace clean, keep the protein away from our fur. You can do this at home any way you like, but always keep your workstation clean. Think of it as though you were a chef and what you would do if you were in a commercial kitchen. To start, we're going to take our rat and we're going to lay the specimen flat down on its stomach. When you are making your first incision on a specimen, there's a few ways to do it. So one way is down the tummy. This is called a ventral incision, and this will often be used particularly in museums and things like that, so that you don't see a seam along the back, given that the specimen's going to be in a natural pose. There's also the dorsal incision, which is an incision down the back, and that's the one that we're going to be doing today. So when I say dorsal, think of a dorsal fin or something like that, and that will help you to remember the back of the specimen. And the final one is case skinning, where there's an incision between the legs. I find that one quite hard, to be honest, so mainly I'll do a ventral or a dorsal. But we're going to be doing a dorsal incision down the back today for two reasons. When you first start skinning, you need to get used to your scalpel. So you need to get used to how much pressure to use and how deep to cut. If we were to make a ventral incision down our stomach, if we cut too deep, then we could potentially cut through the lining of the stomach and release the viscera. So you would have like guts coming out, and that's pretty horrible when you first start to learn how to skin. So if we go down the back, if we go too deep, we're just going to hit the spine, so everything's protected. But also, because we're going to be doing a specimen that's standing up, if your sewing is really bad, which mine is, I hate sewing, because we're going to be doing a standing up specimen, you can hide your stitches at the back. So if you do zombie stitching, you can just back it up in the dome and no one's going to know that you made that mistake. So that's why we're going to do a ventral incision today, just until we learn how to skin. Because we don't want stitches on our show side, so the front side of our specimen, because that's what everyone's going to see. Now, when you're working on something like a rat that was a python feeder, it's totally up to you whether you would like to use gloves or not. Our kits contain gloves, but I prefer not to use them when I first do my skinning, or I learn how to skin. And the reason for that is you kind of start to get like a tactile memory, so a memory in your hands if you're touching something. I feel comfortable to do that because, like I said before, these are python feeding rats, therefore they're not going to have diseases and things like that in them. If you want to use your gloves, please do, particularly if you're in another country where maybe you had to source the specimen and it wasn't bred for the purpose of feeding another animal. You definitely want to be using gloves, particularly with things like roadkill. If it's, an animal that was hit by a car or something like that, you don't know what diseases they're going to come with. So personal protection is very important. Okay. So once I've got my rat into a flat position, I am just going to set up my scalpel, and I'll also take out my pointed tweezers from my kit. These kits we sell, and we also sell these alongside our books and ebooks. And if you are doing this tutorial with us, then those resources are available too, so that you can follow along. We also have free resources in the form of hardware tips and some measurement forms that are available on our website. The hardware tips are for the purpose of learning how to use different tools in the proper manner so that you don't hurt yourself. So we're going to set up our scalpel. I'm using a size 4 scalpel handle, and today I'm using a 23 blade, which is a little bit bigger, which is nice for a rat. I often use a smaller blade for birds. They've got much finer tissue. Okay, so a scalpel has 2 sides. The flat side all the way down, that's the back. And the front will have this diagonal line down it. And what you'll notice with a scalpel blade is it's also going to have a diagonal line, which needs to match up to the handle. And so what we'll do is we'll slide the blade on to about this point, and then you never want to be pulling it down with your hands because you're likely to cut yourself. And scalpel cuts will bleed for a very long time. So you want to put the blade on to about this point. I can also show you on this view. So it's just about halfway down. And then I like to just apply pressure straight into my board so that scalpel blade goes onto my handle, and I've kept my fingers nice and safe. So you'll hear it kind of clip into place when it's in position. Okay, so to begin, we're going to spray down the back of our rat, and we're going to make a guideline. This is just going to be a line that will help us to determine where our scalpel blade's going to go when we make the first incision. So I like to make my first incision between the shoulder blades, also known as the scapulars. The reason that we start there and we don't take it higher on the specimen is because rats tend to have a thin skin around the neck and they often will tear. So you don't want to be trying to put your specimen back together, in a number of hours and find that you've got all this tearing around the head, because it makes sewing very difficult. So you'll be able to place your finger on the back of the specimen and you'll be able to find the scapulars, the shoulder blades. And then we're going to use our pointed tweezers to part the fur, just like you would if you were parting your hair, or if you've got kids, you're probably very familiar with doing this. So it doesn't have to be a perfect science. We just make the guideline to make sure that we're going to be skinning in the right place or making the incision in the right place, but also just to limit the amount of fur that we cut off. We don't want to be cutting those hair follicles accidentally. And we're going to make, as I said, the incision from the shoulder blades, and we're going to stop at about the middle of the thighs. So I'll take my blade. We're always going to use it downwards. We never want to be using it up because you're likely to cut yourself if you use it up. Okay, and then I'm going to use my fingers to pull the skin apart and create tension, and then start to make my first incision. You can see that my little finger and my index finger are pulling the skin apart as I go to create tension on that skin so that my blade travels down it more smoothly. Okay. You can see here I'd have a tiny bit of fur on my finger. It's not a problem. That's why we made the guideline, just to limit how much fur I'm cutting off in the first instance. These guys are quite fluffy, so we're not going to see that at the end. Now, once we've made our first incision, we're going to see the lovely pink spine of our rat. And like I said, if we do go a little bit too deep, then we're going to hit the spine rather than, hitting the internal organs and having spills, which is not very nice. So the next step is we need to then start peeling the skin away from our body like a pencil case. So what I like to do is I'll just grab one side with my fingers. We don't want to be using the scalpel if we don't need to be. The more often we use the scalpel, the more likely we are to create holes. And taxidermy is the arrangement of skin. We care about the skin. We don't want holes in the skin. So you can see that I'm peeling it equally on both sides. You don't want to start peeling the skin on one side, creating tension on the opposite side. You want to work with the anatomy and peel one side, the other, peel one side, the other, so that the skin relaxes away from the body rather than being tight on one side. Now, once I have, I'm just going to extend this incision a little bit longer. Right. Now, once we've started peeling with our fingers, you're going to come to a point where the skin's not going to want to peel away much more. And the reason for that is because of the membrane or the fascia. Now, people say this word in a range of different manners. It's not an issue how you say it. But what it looks like is these clear little strings of membrane. They look kind of like saliva, and that is all that really holds your skin to your body, which is a little alarming, to be honest. And so when we skin, we're not putting our blade onto the skin, and we're not putting our blade onto the torso. We're actually just really gently using our blade to cut through those teeny tiny strings of fascia. And that's going to allow for the skin to separate away from the body. Now I'm going to do the same again on the other side. Really gently just cutting through those strings of the membrane. And you can see how I'm applying pressure with my pinky finger, and I always am pulling the skin with my opposing hand. So just peeling away. I'm getting a nice little pencil case happening. Now, when you're going through this process, and take your time, it's going to start to get a little bit confusing. And the reason why is because rats are a little bit like humans, and they hold fat around their hips So you'll see on the camera here that we have the pink body, the white skin, and then we have this creamy gelatinous tissue. This is fat. So you'll see that all around the hip of the rat. The fat can stay with the body. We don't necessarily want that on the skin. If you leave a little bit on the skin, don't worry, we'll get that off later. But rats are going to hold fat around their thighs, hips, and also they kind of have a backpack of fat in between their scapulars and around their neck. So it's always just good to push that fat towards the body so that you keep finding the line that you're going to skin on. Now, once you've really separated this skin away from the body, we're not going to try and skin under the belly. We're going to put a ring on it. So we're actually going to be able to wear our rat like a ring. And I'm just going to start pulling the belly away from the skin, equally on both sides. And then eventually I'll be able to wear my rat like a ring. And we didn't use the scalpel on the skin on the tummy because that's going to be the part that people can see. So we definitely don't want any holes there. So we've now put a ring on it. The next step is to make your rat to kind of look like a skydiver, and I'll show you what I mean by that. I didn't come from a scientific background or something like that. I didn't even actually finish high school, to be honest. So I've found when I've been trying to learn taxidermy and people use lots of anatomical terms that I find it quite confusing. So I try to teach through shapes, textures, colours, and then we'll also teach you a little bit of anatomy along the way so that you can start building your vocabulary and it will make more sense as we move into, larger specimens. And so in today's tutorial, you're going to see lots of times when I'm like, look at this rectangle or look at this triangle, this is this thing. And I find that will help people to learn. And also the end of each step will be in a certain pose that you can kind of remember where you're up to and what that looked like visually. So like I said, the next step is going to be the skydiver. So to do that one, what we're going to do is we're going to start to locate our kneecap, our patella, on our rat. Now, I'm going to give my leg a little jiggle so that I can see the joint, the knee joint, the patella. And once I think I've found it, you'll know if you're correct because you'll see this pearl-coloured rectangle. Cartilage looks different to bone and it kind of has a purple shimmer. So you can kind of see that shining in the light. And then once I've found that, what I'm going to do is get my flat scissors. We call them that because they've got one flat side and they've got one sharp side. And we're going to get the sharp side and making sure that there's no skin caught anywhere. We're going to push our scissor straight through the tissue under the patella, the rectangle, pearl-coloured rectangle, and we're going to cut straight through it. And it should cut like butter. Cartilage feels different to bone. Bone will kind of crunch and feel solid, as you would expect, and cartilage feels soft. So we're going to cut through that. But then our legs are still attached. So the top of our leg, so our thigh, and then our shin is still attached because of this pink tissue running down here. So what I'm going to do is then, using my scissors, I'm gently going to trim the pink tissue away until my lower part of my leg. So my shin is folded away from the thigh. So see how I've got leg, skin, leg now? They're completely separate. And then once I've got this lower part of the leg folded away, I'm going to gently start to roll my skin down the leg. I'm not pulling the leg, I'm rolling the skin down the leg until I hit the tendons on the ankle. And you'll know you've hit the ankle because you'll see it bending there. But also there'll be this white line, which is the tendon. So if you think about your own ankle, you'll have like an Achilles tendon, a big tendon right at the back of the ankle. So we just want to stop there. If we keep trying to roll the skin down at this point, we'll rip the whole leg off and we'll end up with a pirate rat. And pirate rats are cute, but not what we're trying to achieve in this tutorial. So I've got one leg here. It'll look like a little chicken drumstick. That's what we're trying to achieve. Then I'm going to go to the opposite leg, locate the knee, our pearl-coloured rectangle, make sure there's no skin trapped anywhere, cut through the cartilage, cut through the pink tissue, making sure that I'm not capturing any skin, and then I'm going to start to roll my skin down the ankle until I hit my Achilles or my tendons. Okay, so both legs done. Now we're going to do the same, but we're going to do this on the forearms. So we're going to try and locate our elbow. We don't actually need the scalpel right now. Elbow's a little bit harder to find. You might have to move some tissue around. So I'm going to give my arm a jiggle until I can see this point here, which is my elbow. And there's going to be a tiny little pearl-coloured dot. So I said to you guys that the knee is a pearl-coloured rectangle. The elbow is going to be a little pearl-coloured dot. I'm going to cut through that just like I did with my knee, separate the pink tissue, and then roll that skin down. And finally, last one. And you'll see why we call it a skydiver in a second. So, jiggling my arm to locate the elbow, find that little pearl-coloured dot and cut through that, separate any tissue, and then fold my skin down like so. Now, the reason I refer to this as a skydiver is because you'll kind of get a rat that can be posed like this. And that just means that you've separated all of these limbs out correctly, and that's what we need to do. So that's the skydiver. Now, the next stage I refer to as conjoined twins, and it's a little bit of an easier one. So I'm going to just start to pull my skin away from the rib cage and pull the arms away from the skin on both sides until we can see all the way around our neck. Now you'll know that you're at the neck because you'll be able to feel the skull dropping off, and you can kind of see it there in the camera. So this is the back of the skull, and this is the neck here. And I can see the neck all the way around, and there's no skin caught there. So I can grab my scissors, and I can cut straight through the neck, and then I'm going to have my conjoined twins. Now, one thing I want to talk to you about is if your rat starts to bleed at the nose, which will often happen, it's just part of the process of passing on, is that when specimens thaw, or even a human, they will, perhaps urinate or bleed or what have you. So if the rat does start to bleed at the nose, you can get this substance, which comes in your kit. This is borax. It's also something sold in supermarkets as a cleaning product. It's a member of the salt family, so it's got preservative factors as well. And we're always going to use borax in taxidermy. We use it a lot. And I just like to give my rat a bit of a New York warehouse party and just clean up any of that blood. This will help to dry it out. You can do this if you've nicked the tummy at all and you've got any intestines or what have you coming out. You can also put a bit of borax on there. Okay, so now that we have got our body almost separated from our skin, what we're going to do is we're going to start to pull our skin down our body towards the genitalia, and we're going to do the next step, which is castration station, we like to call it in our classes. And you're just gently peeling the skin down the body until you hit, doesn't matter whether it's a male or a female, until you hit a dark pink line. You can see it here. Now, it doesn't matter if it's a male or female. It'll either be the penis or the urethra. It looks the same. The only difference is a male will also have testicles, and rather large ones at that. So once we've found our bright pink genitalia, we're going to use our blade. This is the only time we can use it up, and we're actually going to sever our urethra or penis. And then we can continue to pull our skin away from our body. If we do need to use our scalpel, we can. So just creating tension. Just going to use my scalpel if I do need to. Often people will put a hole kind of at the bottom of the rat. Just a common mistake people make. If you do, don't stress, because all of our rats are going to receive a tight tuck by the time we mount it, and you're not going to notice it at all. So it's a perfect place to put a hole if you do make a mistake. Right. So I have now peeled my skin away from my body, and I can see all the way around my tail, which is fabulous. And then I'm going to get my scissors and I'm going to cut as close to my body as possible. Not the tail end, the body end, like so. Because these tail bones are actually going to stay inside the tail. Now, if you were working on a bigger specimen, you absolutely have to remove the tail bones. They will break down and they will rot over time. You can get away with leaving them in on a small specimen, and they dry up really great, and you can bend them into shapes and things like that as they are drying, which is cool. Now, this carcass, you can see the anatomy is really cool. You can see the rib cage there, the intestines. It's quite fascinating, really. This can be discarded. We don't need that. if you're using one of our kits, because we'll provide you with a body form that you'll be able to use to replace all this tissue. You have to remove anything that can break down from your specimen. So any of the squishy bits, they've got to come out. So I'm going to get rid of this and pop it into my kidney dish so that I'm not getting protein on my tray. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're now going to focus on the skull. With a rat, we're going to be leaving the skull inside our specimen, and we're going to be rebuilding its features with clay when we get to the mounting process. So we need to remove anything that could rot from this skull. So I'm going to take you through that process now. The first thing that we want to do is we're going to start to roll our skin over our skull. And I'll just use my scalpel on the top of the skull to cut through any of the membrane, the fascia. Okay. Now, you'll know you're at the top of the skull because it will sound like bone. And you'll know that you're at the bottom of the skull because there's going to be a lot of this gelatinous tissue that sits under your chin and gives you that 5 chins like me. And so you'll see that on the camera here. So we always want to be looking at the top of our skull for this process so that you don't get confused with the anatomy. So once I start to peel my skin over my skull, the tissue is going to start to be pulled backwards. And the reason for that is if you were to peel your skin over your head, the first thing that you're going to hit is your ear canal, so the tube that the sound travels through. And that's going to enter your skull cavity, so a little hole in your skull that allows the sound to go in. So what you'll see is, and I'll just stand up so I can make sure that you can see properly, is this little white rectangle that's pulling back on the skull. So a little white rectangle here. And that is the tube that the sound travels down. It looks flat right now because we're pulling it flat. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut right at the back of that where the body is to be and not towards the skin. So if I do that, so right at the back of that, when I cut it, I'm going to see the little hole that the sound travels into the skull, which is pretty cool. So the ear cavity, and then you'll see here the little tube that we just cut through where the sound travels. So I'm going to repeat that on the other side. I'm trying to find my white rectangle, which is coming back here. A little bit hard on the camera, so I'm just going to look a little lower. Then you will find the ear travelling. Sorry, my partner just spoke to me in the middle of filming and now I've lost my chain of thought. That happens, huh? So you'll see here that we've cut the ear canal and then you'll be able to see the ear cavity. I'll bring her on to the camera at the end of this so you can see who that mystery voice was. Okay, so that's the ears done. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to continue to roll our skin down our skull, and we're going to start to see the back of our eyeballs. Now, it's a little bit tricky with a white rat because white rats are albino, which means that your eyeballs are going to be pink, which is not ideal when you're trying to learn. But that was what was available to us at the pet stores. You might be lucky to have a coloured rat or a black and white rat. Now, you can see I've pulled my skin forward, and then what I'm looking at here is the back of the eye socket, and this is my eyeball. So same thing, can't see, back of my eye socket, and then here's my eyeball. Now, a very important part is that we don't want to cut our eyelids. You can make lots of mistakes in taxidermy, but if you've ever seen that book, Crap Taxidermy, if you mess up the eyes, it's never going to look right. So you don't want to cut your eyelids in half. It's very difficult to fix. And by difficult, I mean almost impossible. So we're going to locate our eyelid. Can you see this tiny little white line here? I'll try and focus on it a little bit better. It's just a little white line. It'll also be really clear in our book. That's the corner of the eyelid. So you're looking at just this corner here. And we don't want to touch that. So the way to get around that is just for us to trace the back of the eye socket, making sure that we're never touching that white line. So I'm going to do that on both eyeballs, like so. Just tracing the back so I'm not touching the eyelid. And then I'm going to, once I've cut through that membrane, the fascia, I'm going to put my tweezers under the eyeball and I'm going to grab the optic nerve. Now you're not going to be able to see it, but you'll feel it. So we're going to grab the optic nerve. We don't grab the eyeball, we grab underneath the eyeball and try and get the optic nerve. So you can see the nerve here. It's quite meaty. See this nerve? And that will just help us to get the eyeball out. And actually, I'll just put that into my tray. If you've left any of the optic nerve in, which I have lots and lots, you can just, get rid of that, because we don't need that in our specimen. Okay. Right, now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to grab my optic nerve and put that away, just making sure that there's nothing left in that eye socket. Okay, eyeballs. I don't mind much in taxidermy, but I hate if you burst an eyeball. Ugh, it's not my favourite. Okay, now we have separated our eyelid at the back, and now we've got to separate the eyelid at the front of the eye, where, imagine like your tear duct is. I'm just going to wipe my hands. They're a bit dirty. So I'm just going to use an antibacterial wipe. Okay. Right. So you'll start to see your little eyelids rolling forward. You can kind of see a gap here of the eyelid. See how it's a circle? And we're just going to use our scalpel to separate the membrane right at the front of this eye socket. You're not going to really see what you're cutting. You're just going to be really careful to separate the fascia and imagine where you'd think a tear duct would be. Now, rats do cry, or have tears rather, but they're sexy tears, so they actually wipe them all over their face so that there'll be pheromones to attract the opposite sex. I don't know about you, but I'm not that sexy when I cry. It's not my... Don't look that good, to be honest. Okay, so just going to make sure I'm not cutting on my eyelid, just cutting any tissue around the eyelids, and you'll see on both sides that my eyelids are now all the way up here on both sides. We don't need to do anything with the nose. The nose is really small on a rat, so we don't need to separate the cartilage. We will on other specimens when we do other tutorials show you how to do that, because you do need to split the cartilage on bigger specimens. Right, so we have now done the top of the skull. The next thing we need to do is we need to remove the brains from our specimen. They will break down over time. So the way to do that is just to check if we have any vertebra on the back of our skull. So depending on where you cut on the neck, you may have some of the vertebra. I don't, but I feel like I've got a little bit of bone there, which may be the bone that connects the skull to the neck, which is called the atlas. It's kind of where this saying, holding the weight of the world on your shoulders, comes from. So I'm just going to get my scissors and cut that off if I need to. If you have any vertebra, your finger will rotate exactly like your neck rotates. You're not going to be able to get into the brain cavity if you've got neck attached, so we have to cut that off. And then once we've cut that off, you're going to see this creamy circle at the back of the skull, and we need to get our brains out of that cavity. So to do that, I'm going to take a few of my cotton tips, and this is one of my favourite parts. I find it quite cathartic. Some people don't, but I quite like it. And using a twisting technique, we're going to twist our cotton bud into that cavity and get rid of the brains. Now you're going to need to do this a number of times. And the cool thing about cleaning out the brains is you'll see the cotton tip, or I think in America you call them Q-tips. We call them cotton buds here. You'll see it touching the top of that skull. And that's pretty cool. So we're going to keep on cleaning the brains until the cotton buds come out clean. And the skull will kind of sound dry and a little bit squeaky on the inside, which is not a rat joke, but that's just how it will sound. Okay. Each rat will need a different amount of earbuds, or cotton tips, cotton buds, Q-tips. So just going to keep cleaning those brains out. This one's really quite brainy. I'm a bit surprised how many buds I've had to use. Like I said, the anatomy on every specimen's different, but wow. It's kind of like that cartoon Pinky in the Brain. I don't know if you guys remember that. Alright, that's starting to look good, and I can actually feel the texture on the inside of the skull's changing. It feels dry. And I don't know if you can hear it on the mic, but you can kind of start to hear this squeaking sound. So that's starting to look pretty good. Last one. Okay. So we've separated our ears, we've removed our eyes, we've cleaned out our brains. The last thing that we need to do on our skull is we need to remove the tongue. So to do that, we're going to flip our skull over, and we're going to be focusing on this gelatinous part under the chin. So we'll put a little bit of our borax, like so, onto our specimen, just onto that little chin area. Doesn't need to be on there very long, maybe 10-15 seconds. And we're going to scrape just the top layer off. We don't need a huge amount, see? That's all I've taken off. And that's plenty. And then I'm going to make a V-shaped incision just inside the lower jaw. Like so. You'll feel it because that's the shape of the bone. And then I'm going to go in towards my hand, so in towards the skin, which is going in towards the mouth, and I'm going to try and find the tongue. Now, you'll know you've found the tongue because it will actually look like a tongue if we get it out in one piece. So see this? See how it actually looks like a tongue? It's pretty remarkable. So we will remove this tongue like so, and then just take out any other tissue inside that mouth, and you'll know when you're done, and I hope this will be captured on camera, may not, but you'll see it on your own specimen, so take a look. You'll be able to look inside the mouth of the specimen, and you'll see in here the palate of the mouth, so the little waves that sit on the roof of your mouth, and it's actually really cool. You'll be able to see all of that. I don't think you can see it on this, but you'll be able to see it on your specimen. So that's how you'll know that you're done, even if you break that tongue up and don't get it in one piece. Obviously, I've had heaps of practice. Okay, so the last few things that we need to do on our rat is we need to just prepare this skin for preservation, which means that we need to get off the last few things that can break down, so any tissue. So we've got tissue on the cheeks that needs to come off, some at the back of the skull here. We've got tissue on the arms and the legs that needs to come off, and sometimes you'll have tiny bits of fat or pink tissue that you've left on the skin. So the way that we're going to tackle that is just by applying a little bit of borax, so a little bit onto the cheeks, some on the arms, some onto the legs. Again, you don't need very long for the borax to sit. Okay, so I'm going to start with the back legs, not the tail, back legs. And I'm going to make an incision all the way around my bone. So here, all the way around my bone. Not on the skin side, but on the tissue side. So I'm just going to make an incision all the way around, not breaking my bone, just cutting through the tendon and the tissue. And then I'm going to scrape that tissue up the bone. In cooking, they sometimes call this Frenching. We call this tuliping because it kind of looks like tulips. You'll see that tendon there. I can just cut that off. We don't need that. Okay, see how it kind of looks like a tulip? And then we can just peel that away straight off the bone. So you can see the difference between the legs, yeah? So this is just a bone with the cartilage on top, and then this one's got all the tissue. So we're going to cut around that ankle on the bone. We're not cutting the skin. And then we're going to scrape all that tissue up to the top. If you need to use the scissors to cut through the tendon, do it, it's not a problem. So you can see a tendon here. that off. Just going to get a little bit of borax on my fingers, and that'll help to clean the bones up a little bit. Like so. Now I'm going to do the same thing on my arms. So we've got this tissue on the arms here. So same thing. We're going to make an incision all the way around on the tissue, not the skin. Now be careful because the bones on the arms are, I guess, more fragile than the legs, so you're more likely to break through them, and you don't want to do that. We can fix it, but it's, you know, going to be better for your piece if you don't break that. So taking that tissue off of that bone, and then same again on the other side. And you'll notice that I'm putting my protein, so little scraps into my kidney bowl just to keep them away from my fur, because I don't want to damage my fur or get bacteria into it. So I can peel this tissue off, put that in my kidney tray, and then same again, just a bit of borax on your hands, and then that'll just help to pick off any last bits of tissue. So you can see these legs and these arms, they're looking pretty good. Now we can cut off the pink tissue on the back of the skull. We don't need that. Just be gentle. You don't want to crush the skull or accidentally cut some of the bone off. And then we want to take this tissue away on the cheek, so we can just scrape that away. The more tissue you take away on the skull, the more fragile it's going to get. So you can see that I'm holding my skull by the nose rather than trying to press the skull up here. I don't want to crush it. So just something to be mindful as you remove the tissue, that the skull's going to become more and more fragile, and we just need to be careful of that. We will be reinforcing this skull when we put the specimen back together and making it strong again with clay. But for now, just be gentle. Now I'm working through this process quite fast. You're going to be way more pedantic because you're going to be falling in love with your rat, and you're going to want the bones and the skin to be perfect, which is great. So just work at your own pace. I'm going to do the opposite cheek, like so. Just peeling this off. Okay, a bit more borax. Borax helps grip and dry the tissue out, which makes it just easier to remove. It's hard to move tissue around when it's moist. Okay, and then the final thing is just to give your skin a bit of a once over. Remove any fat. Be really careful when you're working on the skin. You don't want to make holes at the last minute. And look, if you have made a hole, don't stress. We'll be fixing them up when we mount the specimen. And more often than not, we don't sew holes that are less than the size of a pea because they will be hidden. So don't stress too much. It's all practice, and you'll get better and better at skinning. Right, so as you're working on the head, don't forget about the ears. We don't want to rip them off. We need them. So we're just getting rid of all the other kind of fatty tissue. You've got a little bit here under my arms, a little bit here. We want to remove all that fat because we're going to be preserving our skin next, and our solution's not going to work if there's fat because the fat will trap grease into the skin. Okay, that looks pretty good. So once you've got all your tissue off of your bones, you've cleaned up your skull, cleaned up your skin, I've just got this beaker and I'm going to put methylated spirits in this. If you're in the States, I believe you call it denatured spirits. So I'm going to put my skin just inside out into my beaker and then use the methylated spirits or denatured spirits. And that can stay in here for an hour is the minimum. And, 24, 48 hours is the max. And what we'll do is we will resume this in chapter 2, which will fast forward to 24 hours. And we'll take our rat out of our methylated spirits. And then we're going to wash our rat. And then we're going to start the mounting process. So what I would do now is I'll pour my methylated spirits in. I'll do this off camera because it's in our chemical cabinet. And then I would just go through a process of cleaning my workstation. So I like to use the antibacterial wipes to clean my tools, give them a wash as well. In our free hardware tips that we have online, we've got information on how to take your scalpel blade off of your handle, and you also need a sharps container to safely dispose of your blades, because you don't want to be putting them just into like a normal bin or something. It's dangerous and it's not going to be safe for anyone. So I'm just cleaning my tools. I'll give my tray a wash down, wipe it with antibacterial wipes, and we'll resume this in 24 hours.